The RMSO team heads to Mount St. Helens to camp and look for Bigfoot. Dozens and dozens of Bigfoot sightings. The area that we're staying in has 60 Bigfoot sightings on the BFRO site alone. My grandfather's Bigfoot sighting is in this area, so it has been on my bucket list to search for Bigfoot. Here is another Bigfoot sighting report that motivates us to come into the area to search. July 2001. Up until last year, I owned a bait and tackle store on the Kalama River in Kalama, Washington. I guess I would have to say that there were some strange things happening to several of my customers who would fish directly upstream from my store at a hole known as Beginner's Hole. For instance, one of my customers, Steve, and his girlfriend Tasha arrived on the river a couple of hours before daylight and decided to get some rest in the car before the usual crowd arrived. They laid their seats back and turned up the radio. Then all of a sudden, something hit the driver's side window with enough force to almost break the glass. Steve later told me that he thought it must have been a rock of considerable size as it shook the whole car. He immediately started the car and turned on the lights, only to find nobody could be seen in the large parking area, and Tasha was so shook up by it that she made him leave and spend the rest of the night parked under the lights of my store. I guess I really didn't think much of it until approximately a week or so later, about 9:30 p.m., after I just locked up one night and being startled by someone frantically pounding on my store door, only to open it to find a very scared fisherman who had claimed to have seen a Bigfoot within the block of my store just standing on the riverbank looking at him while it walked on the road about 75 feet away. It was late May or early June 2001, so it had just gotten dark. I can't remember ever seeing a grown man so afraid of a wild animal in my life as Jason was at that moment. He just kept saying that he just witnessed Bigfoot and to stay inside for fear it was going to get us. I grabbed a flashlight and started to talk to him. I wanted him to show me where he had seen it, but he refused to go outside, insisting I was crazy because it said it must have been at least 7 foot tall. A week or so later, I went up to Beginner's Hole at about 10:30 p.m. with my beer distributor, Travis, to do some glow balling for some summer run stillhead as I had done for many years. When it started to get warmer, the fish seemed to get more active. We pulled into the parking area, and I ran over to the bank so I could get the first cast because it was usually payday, and Travis stood in front of the headlights, still rigging his pole. I had taken several casts with no luck when I noticed the fish downriver in the deep pool were jumping like I had seen never before. I climbed up to the bank as Travis was just finishing and told him to come on. We were going to walk down and see what was going on. As we arrived at the hole, about 200 yards downstream, we quickly climbed down the bank and began casting. Travis was located 50 feet below me behind a large bush when I heard a loud splash from his direction. Thinking he must have fallen, I yelled to see if he was all right, when to my surprise, we were face to face and he was yelling for me to run in a very panicked voice. I wasted no time following him up the bank because it must have been something pretty serious to scare Travis. He stands 6 feet tall and over 220 pounds. As we climbed into the car, he was yelling something about a giant ape-like figure that had porpoised, then went under, and then came back out of the water and jumped. Whatever it was, it must have been very large judging by the sound that I had heard and seeing that Travis was very wet from the splash that it had made. I guess that's when I started believing that maybe Bigfoot was real. Being very knowledgeable of the river and the fish runs, I came to the conclusion that combined with the fact that the last several years the woods had been closed to the public entry about 90% of the season, and that the summer run steelhead were being let out of the lower hatchery, and almost all of them stopping at Beginner's Hole because that's where they had been released. That maybe had come down to the river looking for food and quite possibly had found a steelhead paradise. It took several days before I and Travis found the nerve to venture back there, but the thought of all those fish made us give in to our fear. What a mistake! Arriving at the hole, I, as usual, ran over to the bank to get the first cast as Travis rigged his pole in the headlights. As I started to cast, I felt very uneasy and continued looking up and down the river, trying to see in the nighttime darkness, when directly across the river from me I heard a baseball-sized rock hit the water a few feet from the bank. I strained my eyes to see what had thrown it, thinking, after telling several of my customers of the early incident, that maybe someone was playing a trick or something. That's when I heard it. A low, deep moan, like sound that turned up high in pitch, and then a scream. I've been in the woods enough to know there is no animal that could possibly make the noise that I had just heard, and it surely wasn't a customer. As I screamed for Travis, I felt reassured to see him already coming over to the bank asking, "What the hell made that noise?" He couldn't even finish his sentence before the sound let loose again. It seemed to be on the opposite shore and running directly away from us at a speed I had never seen any animal run before. It almost seemed like a bird, it was going so fast through the trees directly away from us up the hill. It had seemed like seconds before it reached the top of the hill, maybe an eighth of a mile away, and remaining there for several minutes, making a noise that had every hair on our entire body standing at perfect attention. Then, as quickly as it started, it stopped, and we found ourselves climbing in the car, speeding for the safety of my store, where we sat up all night going over and over what we had just heard. It wasn't until a couple of weeks later that I was forced into going back there because I'm a licensed fishing guide and the only one who does nighttime drift boats down the river. Seeing that I had two paying customers, one a young man in his late 20s from Iowa, and the other a regular customer who owns a house on the river, I felt obligated to do my best to get them fish, as scary as it may seem. I knew that Beginner's was the spot. I launched the boat directly into Beginner's Hole about 10:30 p.m. and had planned to take them about a 2-mile trip downstream, hoping to get a quick fish or two out of the hole and then get the hell out of there, but the fish just weren't going for it. Every time I suggested that we head down, I was cut off by the local homeowner telling me that we were in a hot spot and he wanted to try it longer and to quit being a baby. That there was no such thing as Bigfoot. He too had heard the rumors going around about what I had seen. As he teased me, it got the Iowa guy asking all kinds of questions because that was the first time he heard of the monster that lived in Beginners. I tried to avoid the whole thing as best as I could, but wasn't about to leave it alone, and talked me into telling my story. I was almost finished reciting the month's events when something happened that I never in all of my life will forget. All of a sudden, the pole that I was holding almost got ripped out of my hands, and I yelled, "Fish on!" or so I thought. It took about seconds to realize that something was not right by the way it was pulling. It felt like I had hooked into a bale of hay that had floated by the heavy current, but yet you could tell that it was alive. The Iowa guy was screaming for me to give him the rod, because that was to be his first still head ever, and he took the rod from my hands. As I stood there in my drift boat watching the line slowly peel off the reel, I couldn't help but feel confused about what it could possibly be that was attached on the other end. This is when it stood up in the middle of the river, 30 feet below my boat, and seemed, by the glowing corkies and sand shrimp, to be hooked in the left shoulder and not at all comfortable with the whole situation, or where either of the two gentlemen in the front of my boat. The Iowa guy was shouting something about being a dead body, and I can't recall the local man saying anything at all. The river was about 4.5 feet deep where it was, and it seemed to me the moonlight to be standing waist deep, slowly swinging its arms trying to get free. As I pulled my anchor and tried to stay my distance, the Iowa guy was pulling for all he was worth. It was using 30-pound line, and there wasn't much chance of it breaking. Maybe 3 minutes passed or so it seems like before it finally freed itself and dove under the water, never to be seen again. Just a wake of water heading downstream into the deep hole, and as far as I could tell, never coming up for a breath in the whole 100 yards that it rounded the bend and out of sight. To this day, I have not fished Beginner's Hole, and I am no longer a guide. I mainly stay at home and work on computers. What happened to me on the Kalama River will stay with me for the rest of my life, and I'm sure that all of this sounds pretty strange, but I will tell anyone who wants to know the names of every person involved, and would gladly take them to the place and show them. I am almost certain that if someone stops and spends the spring and summer at Beginner's Hole on Kalama River between the hours of 10 p.m. and 4 a.m., it has quite possibly changed the way they view Bigfoot for the rest of their lives. Hope you guys enjoy seeing the sights, the forests around the Kalama River and the Mount St. Helens area. It's a Bigfoot sighting hot spot. I will include a link to the BFRO report in the description of this video. Here's the follow-up investigation report by BFRO investigator Dr. Wolf H. Fehrenbach. The witness attributes his repeated encounters to the fact that he was out on the river most of the time, it being his livelihood. He mentioned other events. He was fishing from the bank and heard noises behind him in the narrow band of forest between the river and the road. He saw what he thought were two bears. One of them disappeared immediately. The other bear stepped behind a tree, though both its arms were holding the tree. Shortly afterwards, when he and nearby fishermen had returned to the road and were talking with a few more fishermen, an alder in the adjacent thick forest, not more than 20-30 feet away, was vigorously shaken back and forth. The Sasquatch that porpoised in front of his fishing friend evidently jumped vertically out of the water in front of that person, wetting him down thoroughly, but immediately dove under water again, approximately 15 feet from there. The witness also mentioned that it appears that the Sasquatch hunts the salmon underwater, partly for the reason of the jumping fish, partly because of this repeated unverified impression of Sasquatch swimming past and under the boat. Kelly Shaw reporting. When we got to Mount St. Helens and set up camp, the very first thing that we did was go out in the forest and set up a perimeter of game cameras. We love to do that so that if a curious Bigfoot comes in and checks us out at camp, we might capture an image or a video of it. Well, we headed out and gunshots started. Someone camping nearby was sighting in their guns or something, and it was very disappointing. We set up the cameras and come back to camp, and the gunshots resume, and then all of a sudden we started getting vocalizations. Even though we were disappointed about the gunshots the first night, they may have provoked what could be Bigfoot vocalizations, us listening to them firsthand, 100 times better than what my shotgun microphone picked up. I will include a link to us setting up the game cameras and a link to the original vocalizations that we captured. You can watch both and decide for yourself. Keep on watching, we're going to keep on squatching.